first session, as you will notice, we talked about the influence of information in society, how we interact with information consciously and unconsciously. But then the question that we will ask ourselves is, what is information? Have you bothered to really find out what information is and whether there are types of information or not? So this session, I'm going to look at some definitions of information and identify types of information, because yes, indeed, there are types of information. So that's what we'll be looking at. And by way of introduction, I want to begin by saying that we are inundated by information to the extent that information has become like the air that we breathe. Everywhere we tend to, we come into contact with information. So every day we receive and deal with information consciously or unconsciously. This session will deal with information activities in our daily lives which we may or may not be conscious of. And by the end of the session, I expect you to be able to understand the concept of information. That is what information is. You should be able to distinguish between the types of information. You should also be able to identify the various sources of information, because yes, indeed, information emanates from different sources. And so key topics that we will be covering in this session will be topic 1, we'll look at what information is. And then topic 2, we'll look at public domain information. That is, we'll go into the various types of information that there are. Then topic 3, we'll look at private information. Topic 4, we'll look at personal information. And then topic 5, we'll look at the sources of information. So we'll start by asking, what is information? So what do you think is information? Let me point out to you that no one can put a specific definition to information. And so several scholars, several information scientists, several librarians have defined information in different ways. Perhaps what we may say is that information can best be described rather than defined. But Marshall and Mansfield in 1983, for example, defined information as increasing the state of knowledge of a recipient, resolving uncertainty, and then valuing decision making. Now what they mean is that you are increasing the state of knowledge of a recipient, somebody who has a certain level of knowledge. When you pass information onto the person, or when you give the person information, you increase the person's knowledge base. Again, somebody who is faced with a problem, when you give the person information that will help solve that problem, you are then resolving an uncertainty in the person's life. Now, if you need information to make a decision, what it means is that you are adding value to the decision that you make. Porat also says that information is data that has been organized and communicated. Yes, if its information is not organized and communicated, it will not be meaningful. And so by way of explanation or example, let's say I come to you and tell you that your friend, maybe you are Paul and you have a friend called Peter. I come to you and tell you that you know what Peter has been saying behind your back. Peter says that you are a womanizer. You decide not to bother. You won't ask Peter about it, and so it remains information that has not been used, that has not been communicated. It remains data. But the moment you decide to go and confront Peter about what alleged he has said about you, you will realize that by the time we finish with the process, you have created a lot more information. And so when information is organized and communicated, it becomes meaningful and becomes useful. There also says that information is a record of resolved uncertainty. Yes, once you use information to solve a problem, it becomes a record, and somebody else or even you can use the same record to solve more problems or similar problems. Then again, Persley and Hess says that information denotes any stimulus that alters cognitive structure in the receiver. Any stimulus that alters cognitive structure in the receiver. So for example, as you sit here waiting to hear what I have to say about what information is, and so at the end of the day, what I will tell you will be stimulus. The information that I will pass on to you will be stimulus which will alter your cognitive structure. That means it will alter your understanding of what information is. Your previous knowledge of information may be limited, but from what I'm going to tell you now will increase or alter the structure, your cognitive structure of what information is. So he asks that something that the receiver already knows is not information. If you know already, it is not information. It's part of your knowledge base, and so it is not information. The new thing that is passed on to you, which you add, is what we call information. And then the International Standards Organization, ISO, says that information is the meaning that a human assigns to data by means of the human conventions used in their representations. And so, for example, the example that I gave you earlier on about Paul and Peter, if I give you data, if I write, for example, car, it's data. I don't say anything again, you will not understand it. But if I add certain aspects to it and explain to you what it means, then you begin to understand what I mean. And so it is the human conventions that we add to the data that we are receiving that becomes information. Now, Buckland also identifies three aspects of information. He identifies information as process, information as knowledge, and information as thing, or information as a thing. But generally, information is best defined in the context of what we describe as the information pyramid. And you may refer to Appendix 1 in your reading materials for the diagram of the information pyramid. So the information pyramid represents a continuum in which information develops from symbols to data, into information, into knowledge, and finally into wisdom, or the acquisition of wisdom. So if you have a symbol 4, for example, it may mean nothing, or the letter E or the letter A may mean nothing to you until you add something to it, and then you process it. And so, for example, as I said, if I write car on the board, it's a symbol. It has no meaning. You may decide that it means a vehicle or a contraption that you can sit in or that you can drive. But is that what it means? How do I know that what you are saying is true? Or how do you know that that is what I meant by writing car on the board? So unless I process it, if I add blue to it, for example, it becomes blue car. If I add BMW to it, then I identify the type of car. Then you can begin to make sense out of the symbols. So from symbols, when you add up a number of symbols, you get data. And data remains data in the sense that if you do not use it, it will have no meaning. And so if I say blue BMW car, what have I said? How do you understand that? It doesn't mean anything. So fine, it's a car that is blue and the brand is BMW, so what? But the moment I say that it's a blue BMW car with a set registration number and then with an antenna on top, that's the armed robbers from the bank got away in, then it means that I am giving information. I'm giving information to maybe security agencies who will be able to track the armed robbers who have just robbed a bank. And so symbols, when you process them, become data. When you process data, it becomes information. And then when you use information, it becomes part of you. So it becomes knowledge that you have acquired. You add it to your knowledge base. And then when you use that knowledge that you have acquired to the benefit of society, then you have acquired wisdom. You are a wise person. And so at the apex of the pyramid, you have wisdom. So symbols at the bottom of the pyramid are large because they are individual figures or letters. So they are a lot. And when you come to data, because you put symbols together to get data, so the volume of data is smaller than the volume of symbols. And then the volume of information after you have processed data becomes also smaller than data. And then knowledge, it's not a lot of people who are able to acquire knowledge. Let's take our country, for example. Majority of our people don't have knowledge, even though they don't really care whether they have the knowledge or not. Maybe I'm being cynical. But that's the reality on the ground if you put your mind to it. And then knowledge, people who acquire knowledge and use that knowledge for the benefit of society are said to be wise. And so, for example, those who invented the telephone, for example, those who invented the aeroplane, Bill Gates, for example, and his Microsoft, these are wise people. And at the apex of the pyramid, you have very, 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 very small number of wise people. Because if we were all wise in the world, I don't believe that the world would be a good place to live in. And so I challenge you as a student to acquire the knowledge and then trying to make something out of it for the benefit of society, and then you will become a wise person. So this is a diagrammatical representation of the information continuum, where you have symbols at the lower level, then you move to data, then information, then knowledge, and then wisdom. Now, information is also characterized into two broad areas. That is tangible information and intangible information. Now, tangible information is the information that is regarded as thin. If you cast your mind back to what we said earlier on, information as a thing, information as a process, information as a knowledge. So tangible information is information that is regarded as a thing, as an object. It represents physical objects which can be seen, which can be touched. For example, documents, a book, a CD. And then again, it represents information that is recorded and may be in the form of written documents, printed materials, or digitized materials. They also appear in different formats, like books, like newspapers, like magazines, like diaries, like letters, like discs, like databases, artifacts, microforms, etc. Then when we talk about intangible information, we are talking about information as a process, or information as knowledge. These are abstract forms of information, and they are described as process when it is performing the function of informing. And so right now what I'm doing is it's a process, because I am informing you about what information is. And so here we are looking at a process. We are looking at information as an intangible subject matter. And then information as an intangible involves transmitting information from one source to a recipient. And then information is described also as knowledge when it is performing the role of imparting knowledge to an individual, where it is used to reduce uncertainty, or where it is used in decision making, or where it is used for the purposes of manufacture. Now, from the definitions of information that I've given you, I would like you to explain the meaning of information to a layman, and then again to explain the relationship between symbols, data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. I'm sure this is not beyond you. You will be able to do that. Okay, your tutors will be taking you through that. They will be looking at the assignments that you have done. Now we want to look at the different types of information. As I pointed out to you from the beginning, we have different types of information, some of which we are not even conscious of. And so we want to start with public domain information. When we talk about public domain information, we mean information that is meant for the general public, information that is out there. Anybody can have access to that information. And so, for example, the textbooks that you use, they are meant by the writers for you to have access to, for anybody to have access to. Information that you find online, they are all public domain information that is in the public domain, information that anybody can have access to. And so information about threats to the environment, health, or human rights are all issues that are of public concern. Information about corruption, they are public domain information. Financial problems, they are public domain information. Lack of information infrastructure, libraries, archives, museums, and the likes are all issues of public information. Problems in accessing electronic information is part of public domain information. Lack of access to the internet is also part of it. Unreliable power supply is also information that is in the public domain. Now, how do we ensure access to public domain information? Libraries and information centers, archives, museums, these are all public places that public domain information can be found. Okay, and so if an individual doesn't have the money to acquire a particular type of information or a book, he can go into a library and have access to that document in order to be able to use. The same way with the problem of access to electronic information, libraries also provide access to electronic information to the general public. For example, as far back as 1998, public libraries in America started giving free internet access to their clientele, that is to their patrons, the people who use the libraries. And then in the year 2000, the federal government decided to fund all public libraries in order to be able to provide more free access to the internet for the citizens. Well, here it will be a luxury in our parts of the world. So the public library, as I've just pointed out, is one of the main sources of public domain information where individuals can go to if they do not have their own means of accessing the information in order to be able to get the information. People use public libraries for recreational purposes, for information purposes of acquiring information. For example, if you want to find out the currency of a particular country, or if you want to find out the currency rates, now you can go online and find it in any way. But you can go into a library and you can have it. If you want to have access to the acts and of Parliament, gazettes, executive instruments, legislative instruments, you can go to a library and to have it. Now, from the discussion on public libraries, what would you say are the roles of the public library? This is a sample question that I want you to apply your mind to. Let me also add that even though public domain information is supposed to be there in the public domain, everybody can have access to. Sometimes it's not always that you can have access to public domain information, because I cited an example of your textbook. If you don't have money to buy your textbook, you will not have access to public domain information. Again, information online, it is there, but sometimes there are licenses agreements that you have to agree to before you can have access to it. If you do not tick the box that requires you to accept the agreements, you will not have access to it. And so even though it is in the public domain, there are certain things that may prevent you from having access to it. Private information, another type of information is what we call private information. Now, private information is information that is not meant for public consumption. What it means is that it's information that is kept from all other people. It's information that is given on need-to-know basis. And private information is held by corporate organizations. Corporate organizations hold private information, and they include marketing information. That is the kinds of private information include marketing information that is gathered by a company, or the information on the development of a product by an industrial concern. These are what we call private information, and companies are allowed to hold these kinds of information in order to be able to have competitive edge over each other. So let's take, for example, sardines. We all know that sardines are soft, including even the bone. They are soft. Here's a scenario where you have two companies in Ghana, for example, manufacturing sardines. Let's say company A turns out sardines that are hard, including even the bones. Company B does the same. But company B decides to conduct a research, pay people to do research, and to come up with a formula that will make sardines taste the way sardines are supposed to taste, soft, nice, including even the bones. And so they are able to find a formula for creating soft sardines or manufacturing soft sardines. You think they should put it in the public domain for company A to also have access to it? Then where will be the competitive edge? And so companies are required or are enjoined to have private information. And so companies will have private information in order to be able to have competitive edge over other companies or people they are in competition with. And as I said, they spend huge monies in acquiring those kinds of information. And as I said, such kind of information is called commercial confidentiality. That's the private information that is held by an organization. Incidentally, because organizations are allowed to keep private information, it has given rise to what we call industrial espionage, where the rival company will plant spies or pay people to steal the formula for making sardines, so that the other company will also be able to manufacture sardine to taste the way it should taste. Governments also want to keep private information, and I don't know whether what you think about that. Should governments keep private information? Governments argue that they need to keep certain information private in order to safeguard the security of the state. Fine, all well and good. If the government is going to keep information private to secure the state, then it is good. But then who determines what kind of information will secure the state and therefore shouldn't be put in the public domain. And so freedom of information advocates also say that there's no need for governments to keep information from the public, because governments are keeping information or are keeping power in trust to the people, and they must be accountable to the people. Therefore, there is no need for government to keep information private from people, unless government is doing something wrong that they don't want the people to know about. And I am inclined to side with the freedom of information advocacy. Now, ways in which government keep information, you see documents that have been tagged private and confidential. Civil servants, public servants are required to take oaths of secrecy so that they will not reveal certain aspects of information. Okay, let's take for example the recent furor over the Ford expedition. So a transaction that had taken place more than 2 years. We never heard about it until a journalist brought it out, and it became public domain information. And so these things happen all the time. People think that those are the things that influence corruption, or those are the things that promote corruption. That is, governments' attempts to hold information private. As a matter of fact, freedom of information law, for example, hasn't been passed in Ghana for over 20 years now. It has been in Parliament for over 20. The bill has been in Parliament for over 20 years now. Government is finding it difficult to pass that law simply because it will open up government activities to scrutiny. And in the advanced countries, most of them or all of them have passed those laws. And as a matter of fact, the law allows government to hold back certain information, but then government will have to go to a court of competent jurisdiction to get a judge to rule that yes, this kind of information, if you put it in the public domain, it will be more injurious to the citizens than beneficial. But the kind of bill in our country, the bill as I cited some years back, rather requires the individual who is seeking for the information to go to court for a judge to rule that yes, the information that he is seeking is relevant to what he needs it for, which is rather the other way around. It's another way of preventing people from getting access to the information, because we all know how the court system is here. You will pay money, you will spend days and hours on end in the court. Sometimes it will take you several months before you get the information, if you will get it at all. The other type of information that there is, or that we can identify, is personal information. And note, personal information as opposed to private information. Personal information is information that pertains to an individual, or information that relates to an identifiable individual. And as the diagram there shows, you will see the kinds of information that we consider as personal information. A person's age, for example. I'm told that ladies don't give out their age. It's not that I'm told, actually I know that a lot of ladies will not give out their age, particularly when they reach a certain level or a certain stage in their development. Marital status. Some people may also not want their marital status to be known. Email addresses, we have passwords. You don't share it with other people. People don't want people to know their financial status, for example, or their social status, for example. These are the things that we call or we describe as personal information. But then again, is personal information absolute? On a very few occasions, personal information may not be absolute. Okay, so for example, you don't want everybody to know your HIV status, but your doctor knows, because you are obliged to tell your doctor. Otherwise, the doctor will not be able to prescribe drugs for you. And so that's one way of which one way in which your personal information may be known to somebody else. But there are codes of ethics that govern people who need to have information about your personal life. And so, for example, your doctor who knows your HIV status to be negative will not put it in the public domain, because if he puts it in the public domain, he himself will be punished. Apart from you suing him, he can be deprived from practice. He can be banned from practicing as a doctor. The same way with lawyers. So if you have a lawyer, for example, and you have killed somebody, you need to tell your lawyer that yes, you killed the person. in order for your lawyer to be able to plan how to defend you in court. And your lawyer is enjoined by the ethics of his profession not to go to court and tell the judge that, as a matter of fact, my client killed the person. No lawyer will do that. So there is the client lawyer confidentiality. Okay. So there are occasions when you will need to let or you need to let somebody know of your personal information. Okay. And so personal information is not 100% absolute. Okay. Then again, sometimes you would passively give out your personal information. For example, when it comes to census information or market research, census officers will come to your house and they will want to know the makeup of your household. For example, how many wives do you have? So if you have 3 wives, and you have been hiding 2. In your official documents, only 1 is listed. When the census officers come, you will have to disclose the other 2 because they live in your house. They are part of your family. Your family size, if you have 9 children and you claim that you have 2 children, when census will come, they will put it out there that you have 9 children. These are information that you give out passively into the public domain, because at the end of the day, the census data will be published and people can have access to it, even though your name may not be mentioned. Okay. I've dealt with the ethics of disclosing personal information. I've said that doctors, lawyers, bankers, they will not ordinarily disclose information, personal information from their clients or from their patients or from their customers. Now, the right to personal information. Why should we keep our personal information away from other people? It may cause irreparable damage, emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes even physically. And so let's take, for example, you know that maybe at home you have a parent who has maybe 1 screw loose. I don't believe you want to share it with your colleagues, because if you share that information with even your best friend, it may come out. Your colleagues may get to know about it. And so you are sitting in class, a lecturer says something, everybody is laughing. When you alone laugh, then people will turn and look at you. The suggestion there is that it's because you are laughing, you are mad, you have some trace of your parents in you. And so you don't want to give that kind of information out. So that's why it's important to keep some information personal to yourself. Okay? Or for example, let's take a lady who maybe is moving towards maybe 35 to 40, not yet married. She will not give out her age, and it makes sense that she should not give out her age, because if she gives out her age, maybe there's a young admirer who will see that he's older than her, and so he wouldn't want to come forward. And so it's important to keep certain information personal to oneself. So these are, in the main, some of the kinds of information that exist and that we need to deal with. So we have seen the types of information, but how do we generate information, or where do we get information from? What are the sources of information? That's the next topic that we want to deal with. And we categorize information into the sources of information into 2 broad areas. That is primary sources and then secondary sources of information. Primary sources of information are information that is gathered firsthand. It may be collected for the first time for a specific problem. Examples of primary information, or examples of how primary information is generated, is through observation, through experiments in the lab, through surveys, or through subjective estimation. Sometimes you don't have a basis for measuring, and so you can make a conjecture. That is subjective. Secondary information is information that is derived from publications, things that have already been published in the form of books, journals, and magazines. Internal company information that is generated internally from within the company, is also secondary sources of information. And then information that is purchased from outside for the use of a company is also secondary sources of information. Then government agencies also use secondary sources of information, or information that is generated from government agencies also constitute secondary sources of information. We may also add, of late, another level or another category has been added, that is tertiary sources of information, or tertiary sources of information. Yes, tertiary sources of information. These are information that you will find in the form of handbooks or notes. For example, when you were in SHS, those of you who read literature, for example, you will have maybe Shakespeare's Othello. There are notes that have been published on it to help you study and then pass your exams well. Those are tertiary sources of information. But there are problems that we may encounter with sources of information. The first one is partiality or impartiality, depending on how you look at it. If information is impartial, then it means that the information is objective and it can be used to a good purpose. But if the information is impartial, it may land you into trouble. For example, there's information out there, you put information out there, and you skew the information to benefit a particular individual or organization. Obviously, what you are doing, you are being impartial, and so then we will have problems with that kind of information. And then validity of information. Information may be valid or may not be valid. For example, if at the end of the lecture, that is the course, at the end of the course, I know you'll be asking for areas. They always do. I'm sure your predecessors will have told you by now that at the end of the course, you will ask for areas of interest for you to pinpoint your studies. If I tell you I will not give you areas, and so you go away, then you write the exam, and then later on I send information that come and let me discuss those areas with you. I am sure nobody will show up. And then those of you who even are audacious may even send me text messages that I am mad. I'm sure it will happen. Why will you do that? Simply because the information that I was going to give you will not be valid anymore. You don't need the information anymore. So validity of information is important to its use. If the information is valid, you can take decisions, solid decisions based on the validity of that information. Then reliability. If the information is reliable, it is also useful. If it is not reliable, it means that it can cause you problems. If you pass out information or if you pass on information that is not reliable, decisions may be taken based on that unreliable information, and you realize that you have caused more harm than good. And then consistency. If I give you this kind of information, if I tell you that there are 4 types of information today, and then tomorrow I come and tell you that there are 3 types of information, I'm not being consistent with the information, and so the tendency is for you to brush aside the information that I'm giving you. Then there is the age of information. Generally, people who need information use current information. But that doesn't mean, therefore, that information that is old is not useful. There are people who also use old information. Researchers, historians, for example, they make use of old information. And so the currency of the information or the age of information will determine the purpose to which you are putting the information. So in the main, this is what I want to tell you about how information may be defined or described, and then the types of information, and then how we generate the various kinds of information in terms of primary information, in terms of secondary information, in terms of tertiary information, and then how valid the information is, how impartial the information should be, how reliable the information should be, and then how consistent the information should be, and how current the information should be in order for it to be useful and relevant to your purposes. Thank you for your time.